Hello there, welcome back to my painting channel. And today we're going to be painting something just a little bit different again. Today we've got a Blood Bowl Norse Runner. Here's our little runner. This runner is from the Goblin Guild Kickstarter, and this is a metal or pewter miniature, so this is going to be a little bit of a different painting. It's going to be a little bit of a different painting job than normal. So I'm going to stick with starting out with the paint, starting out with the skin. Obviously we need paint to paint the miniature. So we're going to start out with a medium flesh tone from Vallejo. The numbers and everything as normal, just across the bottom. So if you want to follow along with what I'm painting, and pretty much we're just going to cover all of the skin in this medium flesh tone. Now to begin with, this does come out quite yellow. Don't be put off by that as we go through the stages of highlighting and shading. This does become quite a nice barbarian style flesh tone. So as you can see, I've got my paint quite nicely thinned down, and we're just covering over all of the skin. Don't forget about covering the hands, the fingers, the legs and things just on the bottom as well, around the kneecaps and bits like that that are exposed, and I cover all of the exposed flesh in this colour. These miniatures from Goblin Guild are really nice. There's a lot of character to these miniatures, and I know a lot of people tend to worry about painting metal miniatures if they're new to the hobby. It's a little bit of a different sort of different kind of challenge, but they're lovely. So once you've got the skin tones done, you want to move on and just put Brightland flesh shade across. So this is a nice warm flesh shade. This will give a little bit of depth to the model, but it also has a nice warm tone to it, as you see here. So once the flesh shade is dry, I'm going to go back to the flesh tone that we were using. So just going to go back to the medium flesh tone, and across the chest, and especially across the shoulders and things like that. As you see, I'm just using sort of very thin sideways lines here, because we're going to try to create the depth and illusion of some of the ripples in this Norse Runner's muscles. So I'm trying to create a little bit more definition to the chest than just a flat colour. We're going to try to use that shade in between as a little bit of a darker point, as you see here. And that does create a little bit more character, a little bit more depth to your miniature as well. You don't want to just paint back a real flat tone. You want to try to make sure that you're using the shade to gain a little bit of character and a little bit of depth as well. As you see with the forehead, I'm leaving a line across the forehead, almost where, not so much he's frowning, but almost like a little bit of a crease across his forehead. And the same across his jaw lines. I'm just following on where the paint is, but just avoiding as much as I can where the shade is stuck in the recess, and just across the cheekbones. You see that it's darker underneath and lighter across the top, and that's because we're going to repaint the colour back in on the higher up and on the raised areas, while leaving those darker recesses darker, like the shade colour. It's a very simple technique to do. It's almost just following along the lines of what your miniature already has. And just to show you again sort of that straight line sort of effect, I kind of follow in the pattern. Just going to go down the back and across a little bit of the shoulder muscle, a little bit of the shoulder blade, sorry. As you see here, it's just following that line, just trying to keep nice and straight and nice and controlled. And that way you get yourself a little bit more tone and a little bit more depth to how the skin tones and the skin, like the muscle and the turning and the dynamic pose, will actually work well with how the skin sort of shows up, really, with how the skin sort of affects the miniature. I mean, when you place this on the tabletop and stand back and take a look, you're really going to notice that you spend quite a lot of time on the skin. With the majority of this miniature being skin, and miniatures like this, barbarians and things especially, you want to spend as much time getting the skin right as possible, or get the skin to the stage that you want as possible, because that's the part of the miniature people are going to notice the most, is how well the skin looks. So just going back with those straight lines, what I've done now is, using the medium flesh tone from Vallejo, I've also added a small amount of bone white to the mixture as well, and I've done this to highlight the medium flesh tone. And again, this paint is thinned down so that when this goes across the top of our skin, it's going to highlight but not look out of place. So it's going to tone in quite nicely. And you can do this a few different stages. So I've done the flesh tone, the shade, the flesh tone, then this half and half highlight. But you could then make another highlight further with a little bit more bone white if you really wanted to pick out on the cheekbones and things like that. So you can push this as far as you like, and you can put as many layers as you like in. And you can go as far as you like with your own personal style and however you particularly like the miniature to look. For me, because I use quite a cartoon, simplistic sort of style, this will be enough for me, just going up to this one highlight. But again, that's all purely just personal choice. They're your miniatures, you paint them however you like. But again, as you see, just following the face, following the pattern and the lines, while trying to leave the recessed areas a little bit darker. You don't have to cover all of the normal medium flesh tone with this. Because this is thinned down, you can sort of cover just a patch of it where you just want the highlights to be. So you don't need to go back and redo everything that has been painted. You can just go back and hit the very tips and the very edges like this, just on the muscle definition here. You don't need to cover the whole thing, just hit in a little bit of those raised points like so. His skin will stand out, and it'll start to make a little bit more depth to that skin style and the way that the miniature looks as well. You just want to be very careful when you're painting these bits not to lose, not to hit any of the points where your brush might hit the shades. So once my skin is done and dry, I'm going to move on, and for this particular Norse team I'm going to be using a light blue colour, because blues will tie in with having a snowy sort of cold base and things like that as well. So for this one we're using a Vallejo Andrea blue. This is just a base colour anyway, and we're just going to fill all of the base colours in to the rest of the miniature before we put a different sort of shade and a different kind of tone to it. But for this team, as I say, we're going with a nice light blue. And the blue colours and the blue tone will lend itself to having a bit of a colder base and a bit more of a cold tone to it. So we're moving on to doing his hair. Now I wanted his hair to be a little bit sort of blonde. The danger there was because the skin tone is quite light, I didn't want the hair to blend into the skin tone. So I'm using a Vallejo bronze flesh tone, which looks almost as if this is going to blend in a little bit too much. So what we're going to do is, when it comes to highlighting this, we're going to highlight this with quite a nice gold yellow, quite a nice vibrant yellow, so that the flesh tone then becomes almost like the middle, and then our yellow tone will stand out and make this blonde, this light yellow hair look really nice. It should pop then just on the top of the miniature as well. So we're using Vallejo Earth for the boots. I find with Vallejo Earth is it's quite a nice, it's just a nice, very standard sort of brown. This is a very versatile brown. This works very good for gloves, boots, shoes. You can use it for things like belts and leathers, although I do personally prefer to use a darker brown to base leathers and then build up from there and turn it into a little bit more of a leather tone. But yes, Earth is a very interesting. It's a very good middle of the road brown. It's very good for these sorts of parts of your miniature, gloves, boots, those sorts of things. I tend to use this a lot on shoes, and then I use a little bit of of the weathering effects and things like that to sort of build up a little bit more character under the shoes as well. And it's purely because I don't like to make my boots and shoes and things on my miniatures too dark. I like to keep them quite an average sort of middle tone. Once you make them really dark and you lose detail in your boots, you can kind of lose the boots to the base of the miniature, and it's nice to have your miniature stand out from the base. So again, personal choices, but this is how I do my boots anyway. So once we've done the boots, I'm going to move on and use a very dark colour. So like I was saying with the leathers and things like that. Now for this one I use a Vallejo PANZER Aces Dark Rust. Dark Rust is a little bit of a specialist paint. This one normally comes in sort of like a PANZER Aces box set or things like that. If you combine it separately, that's fantastic because it's a great paint for doing things like leather straps. If you do struggle to find this one, I used to use, before I found the Vallejo paint version, I used to use a Citadel Dryad bark quite a lot for this kind of base dark tone. So if you are struggling to find this one, or if you're wondering sort of what paint effect that I'm using on this, this is the dark leather effect that I'll be using for the bag. This is also going across all of the straps as well, across the back and the front, and also the straps around the shoes as well. So you can see that the boots are already covered in the earth tone, but we're just going to use a darker tone to cover those straps as well. So make sure that you manage to cover those to give your model a little bit more depth, because you don't want it all just one colour. We want to try to mix and match up a few different colours. Take your time with the straps as well. This is a very dark paint, so you don't want this to blend into all of the hard work that you've done across the shorts and across the blue. You want to try to keep these as separate as possible. There we go, just trying to be as careful as possible with the leather straps. As you see, we've painted the blue and the blue's gone into the gaps. We want to try to paint the leather straps, but without letting the paint run into those gaps. And we'll do the same thing on the shoes as well. Again, as you see, you've got leather straps around the shoes. By the time you get there, it should look a little something like this. I'm going to move on to the shoulder pads and the knee pad as well. Now, my personal choice for silver, I have a personal love for the Army Painter metallics. I find that they cover the miniatures really well, and they have a really good sort of metallic feel to them. They have a good looking colour. So for the shoulder pads and the knee pads, the base tone that I'm going to use is the Army Painter Plate Mail Metal. This is one of my favourite metallic colours. As I say, the coverage on these paints is very good, and the shine that they give you miniatures really does stand out. It's very nice colour tone as well. So don't forget to do the knee pad as well as the shoulder pad. And then we're going to move on and do the fur. Now the fur, to make things a little bit different, to try to create a little bit of a contrast. With there being so much brown and so many leather straps and things around the middle area, I'm going to paint this grey, so we're going to use a grey fur so that this gives a nice contrast between the dark leather straps and the grey fur. If I painted the fur in a brown tone, then it would sort of maybe possibly fall or sink into the leather straps. So by creating something grey like this, hopefully this should create a little bit more of a like a light to dark contrast, and create a little bit more to look at, rather than it all just being sort of a single tone sort of brown across the miniature and things like that. So it's nice to have a little bit of contrast. So just be as careful as possible and follow the fur around. Just go around the side and back as well. And once we've done all of the base coats, we're just going to go across and do a sort of a wash tone in. And for this we're using the Army Painter Soft Tone, which is a nice brown tone. Because of that, we're just going to cover all of the areas that we've done. So the hair first with the bronze tone that we used. You can use this soft tone to cover up everything. So as you see, the soft tone is a nice tone because it sits in the recesses quite nicely and darkens in a lovely way, but it doesn't darken the miniature too much. So when you're using the soft tone, it doesn't completely change. It doesn't darken down your colours then, so it only darkens in the recesses really. So what I tend to do is, with metal as well, to create kind of a beaten or broken metal, I'll use the soft tone on this and then another tone. I always like to use 2 or 3 different shades on metal, because metal isn't one flat colour. It's not silver with just one tone. It tends to have little bits of black, little tones of brown, sometimes other colours as well, depending on if you want it to be a beaten or slimy or dirty metal as well. So so cover your silver in the soft tone as well. And again, across the bag, the straps, the knee pad, the shoes. For this, I'm also going across the shorts, the blue, and that's pretty much just to tie it into the colour of the others. But again, I'm going to use another shade a little bit later to tie that in again, and I'll show you that when we get to it. But for now, all of those base colours, if you just want to take your time and go around, just apply this soft tone. Try not to get this onto the skin, and just try to tie all of those base coats and base colours together as much as possible. Again, don't forget about the gloves and the wrist guard as well. It would always be it's good to try to match up and tone up all of the colours together in the same way. Just taking my time just here down the bottom area and around the short side. The good thing with soft tone is sometimes it can seem like you've overloaded a little bit too much onto the model, and as you just move it around, it sits. It tends to sit in a really, really nice way. So you don't need to put too much on. You don't need to be worried too much about not covering enough. So as I said, I'm just going to move on and use a second shade, a second tone. This one is from Citadel. This one is a Null Nile, which is a black shade, and this one I'm just going to use for the metal, the blue trousers and the fur as well. You want to use the black on the fur so that this then creates a little bit more depth to the fur, because when we dry brush back up, again talking about that contrast, the amount of difference between light to dark is going to be very, very nice indeed. Again, Null Nile black is always good for silver, so it's good to put this onto the silver. Or I wouldn't put the Null Nile on though, is I don't use this now on the shoes or the gloves. Those are brown with a brown tone, and we'll leave those with the brown tone. There's no need to put black onto the brown, because they're already creating a nice effect in it. Just take your time, be as careful as possible, try not to get this onto the skin. So you don't get a bit of the shoulder pad. If you have put a little bit too much on, as you can see, I put a little bit too much there, you can manipulate and move in as much as possible. If not, clear the brush of the wash and use a dry brush to just poke it into the wash, and it will absorb some of that wash back out as well, so that you're not covering too much of it again. And there we go. So now once we've applied all of the washes, we're going to move on into a little bit of a dry brush. We're going to go back with the grey first. So with the grey, we're going to go back to using pale, the blue-grey pale, from Vallejo. And with dry brushing, I'm using a small dry brush for this. With dry brushing, it's always good to apply in small amounts. So you apply in small amounts and build up. It's always good to apply in small amounts and build up rather than apply too much and then try to take it away. With dry brushing, it can be quite finicky, so you want to try to apply in small, just keep on building and keep on building. And that's something that I do before dry brushing, is make sure that there's almost no paint on the brush before going ahead with dry brushing. And once you're happy with your dry brushing, then we're going to move back to the Andrea blue. And the Andrea blue is quite complicated. It's just about trying to get back under and into those highlighted areas of the shorts. It's quite tough to get back into those gaps, so try using a small brush, and again, very much take your time. Again, what we're going to try to do is simulate the same sort of thing as what we did with the skin. So we're applying it onto the shorts, but we're not covering the shorts. We're going to leave a few lines and things like that to try to create some creases and bits and do our own sort of thing. Now with the leathers, the highlight for the leathers is a mahogany brown from Vallejo. This one has been thinned down quite a bit because this one we're just going to hit the edges and the tips of the straps. We're also going to follow around the sort of recessed, the raised areas and the creases under the bag. And again, like we did with the skin, we're going to use those straight lines to create a texture on the bag as well. It's quite awkward for me to show you because I'm left-handed. With this particular one, I'm covering a bit, so apologies for that. But you can just see when I'm hitting the edges here, just trying to highlight with a thin down lighter brown. And you can see the effect that it's having on the bag already. So yeah, as you see, just show you on this side as well. Just going to hit those edges with the mahogany brown. This is the second layer of mahogany brown that I've used, because as you can see, there's already a tone there. So we're going back to a little bit of dry brushing. And this one is a bronze flesh tone. And again, just building up in very small amounts. This one is for the hair, so this is how we're going to make his hair light and bright so that it stands off that skin. So again, we're trying to take away that brown tone and just create a little bit of a highlight across. So with this one, we're going back to the original tone that we used for his hair, just to get that highlight back after we've used the shade to darken it down a little. Take your time with your dry brushing as well. Try to be careful so that you don't end up dry brushing parts of the face and things like that. And then for the highlight of the hair, I'm going to use a gold yellow, and this is where the blonde and the real bright streaks are going to come in. And as you can see, even though it's dry brushing, which tends to be sort of a technique that people would associate with not so much control, you can see that it's very much taking my time, slow and small amounts with a small dry brush rather than a large dry brush, because you don't want any of this paint to bleed out onto any of the other bits that we've already done, like the leather strap and things like that you can see there. We're trying to be as careful as possible while maintaining and building that highlight layer there. And so once we're happy with all of our dry brushing, and we've got our leather straps done, I'm just going to go back with the Vallejo earth tone and just pick that colour back up on the points. I'm just going to avoid the recessed points and just going to try to bring a little bit of the colour back in so that it doesn't look too flat. Again, just like normal, avoid where the shade is sat. Just try to build up a little bit of character around the raised areas rather than the recessed areas. In the shade to sit and create depth. As you see, I'm just going across his shoe here, and just leaving a little bit in the dark. I mean, the key to this, and you can see where the brown is blended on the bag and the way that the blend is working on the shoes here as well. The key to this is just making sure that you've got your paint just thinned down nice enough so that it will hit and dry on the miniature in a nice form, but without overdoing the colour. So you want to make sure that it's nice and thin, and it can be blended onto the miniature well, but it also dries with a little bit of a pattern, a little bit of a tone and things like that as well. It's all about practice. The more you paint, the better you get. The more you mix your paints, the more used to using thinned down paints you get, and you can start branching out into things like sort of like wet blending and things like that at a later stage as well. There you go. as you can see, I'm just trying to take my time, trying to make sure that that gap where the shade is between the darker area again. It's all about contrast. You know, when you're painting, you want light bits, you want dark bits, you want it to look interesting when you model your picture. In the points where the light shows. And again, you do the exact same thing across the gloves and the wrist guards and things like that as well. There we go. Shoes are starting to look very, very nice. So I'm just going to hit a few lines now across the gloves as well. So again, hitting a few lines like this will make it look almost as if there's a few darker lines going through. So again, like creases and ruffles and things like that are going across and through the gloves, through the cloth and the leathers, creating a different sort of tone and texture. It also goes nicely with the dynamic pose of the miniature as well. I mean, as he's sort of running, nothing's going to stand still and be one perfect flat sort of texture or tone. So having those lines go across, it adds to that movement and that motion as well. So just going to hit and just going to touch on the final few bits of details. So going back to the plate mail metal from the army painter, and he's got a few metal studs just across his arm guard here on his right arm. So you have to be very, very, very careful and just gently tap the silver across each one of these tiny little studs. There's also a brooch, like a belt buckle across the strap from the bag as well. That is something that we're just going to touch on across here, as you see. This here, again, be very, very careful not to paint into the middle. But if you do, it's easy to repair. Just use a small wet brush to just bring a little bit of the paint back out to the centre, which is something that I have to do because I painted it. So with the same plate mail metal, we're now going to dry brush those metal parts. We're going to make these a little bit brighter. It doesn't matter with these if they're a little bit scruffy and a little bit rough, because metal is supposed to be a bit battered, a bit worn, things like that. So take your time again, nice and gentle, build up that texture, build up that tone. You see with the silver, you can see it attaches quite quickly, so you don't need so many layers or so much building. And just to give it a little bit of an extra glow, just across the top area and the raised edge, we're going to dry brush a bit of shining silver from the army painter as well. This is a highlight silver, so this is just about trying to catch a little bit, so we're not going to dry brush as much. And for our final stage, I believe, we're just looking at adding a highlight to the blue. So again, for the Vallejo, we're going to use a highlighted blue, and this is an electric blue. So this is a little bit, and again, we're just using those lines and those angles to create a little bit of motion to the way that the character is flowing and the pose of the character as well. Just going to be as careful as possible to just pick up on some of those highlights and pick up on some of those parts of the shorts. Just being very, very careful now on the underneath not to touch any of the skin or any of the leathers that we've done. Just hitting just leaving a little bit of a crease there from the darker blue underneath, and trying to create that element of depth. And there you go, my friends. That is a Norse Runner from the Kickstarter set. So yeah, it's been quite a nice paint job. It's been nice to use a different kind of skin tone for this one, because I tend to use a very similar sort of skin tone on a lot of my miniatures at the moment. It's just nice to give you guys something a little different to watch. But as always, you know, I mean, you paint them how you want. It's just nice to talk and paint along with people. As always, my friends, thank you very, very much for watching. I appreciate it, and take care.